Tonight, many North Carolinians headed to the polls to settle some major runoff elections in North Carolina.
And we have to think the weather affected the turnout today. Who was going to face off in the 13th congressional district, the state auditor's race, and the lieutenant governor's race in November? That was settled.
WRAL's Dan Haggerty and Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie have been watching the returns all night. They join us now with the results. Hey, guys.
Hey, guys. Hey, we're going to start here with what was not a huge surprise here. No. This is the 13th district. We saw Brad Knott really 90% of the vote here. Of course, Kelly Daughtry had dropped out of the race, but man, a really interesting trajectory to get to tonight.
You know, it was. I mean, this was actually Kelly Daughtry led after the primary, but then Donald Trump, who did not get involved in the first part of the primary, endorsed Brad Knott in the runoff, and that was pretty much the death knell for the Daughtry campaign. It was just a few weeks after that she announced that she was suspending her campaign and endorsing Daughtry. I mean, it was not, rather.
Right. Interesting. Tonight, she's still 9% of the vote, despite the fact that she had already dropped out.
You can see there's a little bit of green right around the south of Smithfield and a little bit in northern Wake County, which is probably her strongholds.
We are covering the campaign tonight. WRAL's Aaron Thomas is live from Brad Knott's, I guess, victory party at this point, though I'm pretty sure he knew things were wrapped up earlier.
Yeah, Dan, in fact, not only Brad Knott, but his supporters, some of which you see here at Lafayette Grill in North Raleigh, many of them were surprised when this race was called in his favor earlier this evening. In fact, we want to show you the moment that we saw Brad Knott, this former federal prosecutor, gathering and mingling one-on-one with more than 100 people who filled this space as they were waiting for the results to come in. Now, Knott addressed the crowd shortly afterwards, thanking his supporters and a number of politicians, including former President Donald Trump and Senator Ted Budd. Now, tonight's outcome was expected, with GOP opponent Kelly Daughtry dropping out of this race after Knott picked up the endorsement from Trump. Knott told the crowd that endorsement was a, quote, gracious boost to the campaign. Now, I asked him earlier this evening, shortly after the race was called, how he plans to sway the unaffiliated voters here in our state and how those outside of the victory party in the November general election.
How do you convince those voters to vote for you in the general election?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, we look forward to talking to anybody. In this campaign that we just finished, we talked to a lot of independents, we talked to a lot of unaffiliated, and then obviously Republicans. But our solutions, they're not partisan solutions. You know, what we've advocated for is strengthening law enforcement, securing the border, managing spending in a responsible way, cutting back where we can. Those aren't partisan solutions.
Yeah, Brad Knott tells me that he's already looking forward to hitting the ground running. He will face off against Democrat Frank Pierce in the November general election. Aaron Thomas, WRAL News, live in Raleigh.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about this showdown here.
Yes, absolutely. So Frank Pierce is going to be up against Brad Knott. Frank Pierce has not won a campaign at this point. I think he ran for Raleigh City Council not too long ago, but Democrats wanted to get somebody on the ticket in every single district. The thing is, this district, I think, went around 75% for Trump in the last election, so the odds of a Democrat winning this are pretty slim.
Got it. Let's take a look at some statewide races here. We got the race for state auditor. This one is too close to call for tonight. Closer than you thought?
It's very close, and actually, it's starting to pull apart a little bit now. They were really trading paint earlier in the evening, but up and down. But it looks like Bullock is pulling out to a little bit of a lead here. Jack Clark is a political newcomer. Dave Bullock, a pretty well-known political insider. The two men facing off for the right to challenge Democrat Jessica Holmes in November, but too close to call yet.
78% of precincts reporting right now, so we might have something a bit later in the newscast here. And lastly, the race for Lieutenant Governor. Weatherman winning this race with 76% of the vote.
Right, and Jim O'Neill could still add a few more votes because his home county, Forsyth, is still white, so they haven't counted those votes yet. But even so, this is Hal Weatherman's race, definitely, and he's going to be up against Lieutenant Governor Rachel Hunt, Lieutenant Governor candidate Rachel Hunt, for the race in November. There you go. You can see right there, Democrat Rachel Hunt. She's currently a state senator. Will be facing Hal Weatherman, a longtime political GOP operative.
Okay, more to break down on this, Gerald, as well as the race for state auditor, which again we are not ready to call just yet.
Yeah. All right, we'll check back with you two in just a little bit. Thanks. For results anytime, just go to WRAL.com.
And an update for you just in. Jack Clark has called Dave Bullock to concede this race. He sent out his concession note just a few minutes ago, said he has, once he was out picking me in Wake County, which was one of Jack Clark's strongholds, said it was clear that was it. I'm confident he's got it in the bag. He has my complete and total support for the general. We ran a clean, friendly campaign. So with that, that'll let us know that in November, it's going to be a race between Dave Bullock and incumbent Democratic Auditor Jessica Holmes. That race coming up, as we said, in November, it should be a good one.
All right, Laura, thank you.
Tonight, we are tracking runoff election results.
Yeah, we're learning who will face the Democratic challengers in the 13th Congressional District, the state auditor's race, and the lieutenant governor's race in November.
WRAL's Dan Haggerty and our Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie have been following these results very closely. What happened, guys?
Go ahead, Laura. I mean, take it away, because here we got Brad Knott and Kelly Daughtry. This was a shoe-in, more or less, for Knott, since Daughtry had dropped out of the race.
More or less, because her name was still on the ballot, right? She dropped out of the race, suspended her campaign, but she didn't do that until after the ballot had already gone out. The election had already started. So technically, she couldn't drop out, withdraw. So it was a question how many votes she was going to get. Obviously, Brad Knott got his message out just fine, 90.7% to less than 10% for Daughtry.
Do you think that played into the overall turnout for this? I mean, we got over here, this number shows how many total votes, 21,000, out of how many potential voters? The
potential voters for this were for that district were about 366,000. So you can do the math on that. It's a few percent. But you also have to remember the weather today was really pretty bad. So that probably kept a lot of people in.
A primary runoff is getting the least amount of attention typically. It
tends to be a single-digit turnout anyway.
Let's take a look at the state auditor's office. So this was called just a couple of moments ago.
Just a few minutes ago. We just got off the phone with Jack Clark. He conceded this to Dave Bullock. He said once Bullock won Raleigh, which is what Jack Clark was watching, he said he knew it was kind of all over. He's thrown his complete support behind Bullock. Bullock has already given his acceptance speech, said he's looking forward to that November race against Democrat Jessica Holmes. Dave Bullock, a lot of people know, a well-known political figure. He's on the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees. Jack Clark was a newcomer, first-time candidate for this. He's a CPA. He said he wanted to try to be a public servant and make a difference, but this was not his year.
You know what? Was close, though. It was kind of a nail-biter for quite some time. Was it closer than you thought?
It was much closer than we thought initially. I mean, when the first results were coming in, they were like literally swapping the lead for a while. So.
All right, so let's take a look at Lieutenant Governor. Of course, Mark Robinson is running for governor, and this is to be the Republican nominee.
Right, and Hal Weatherman had the endorsement of Mark Robinson, and obviously that helped him quite a bit. 74 to 20. I think that's a bigger, wider spread than I think a lot of us were expecting to see in this race. Jim O'Neill, Forsyth County District Attorney, who has run a couple of times for statewide races, actually very narrowly lost the race for AG to Josh Stein back in 2020. This time, not as good as showing in that primary runoff. Okay, so we're going to continue to look at this. So you can find full breakdowns at WRAL.com. And coming up on WRAL News at 11 o'clock, we're going to look at the future now as we look forward to November. Lena.
What do you make of the fact that only 21,000 or so voters turned out for the 13th, and they spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on these ads? You know, it's millions of dollars on the ads, absolutely, and millions of dollars across the state for election costs too. But you know, democracy isn't cheap, right? And you know, and there's certainly no shortage of money flowing in politics these days. That is true. Laura, Dan, thanks so much.
Voters are settling some major runoff elections in our state.
We're learning who will face off in the 13th congressional race, the state auditor's race, and the lieutenant governor's race in November.
WRAL's Dan Haggerty and Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie have been watching returns come in all night, guys.
November is taking shape. We can't tell you in the 13th district, Brad Knott is going to be moving on to the general election. But man, what an interesting journey to get to this point.
It sure was. You know, Kelly Daughtry was actually in the lead in this race right before, during the primary. But after the primary, Donald Trump stepped in and endorsed Brad Knott, and that seemed to shift the momentum here. Kelly Daughtry about 2 weeks ago suspended her race and basically said she was backing Knott. And you can see the results tonight. She did not even make it into the double digits.
Let's check in with WRAL's Aaron Thomas. He is with the Knott campaign, and some of the supporters there joining us live tonight with some reaction. Aaron.
Yeah, Dan, well, that victory party wrapped up not too long ago, but I can tell you for Brad Knott and his supporters, they were definitely excited to see this runoff race called in his favor. Let's actually take you inside Village Grill where that victory party was held. You had more than 100 supporters. You saw Brad Knott, the former federal prosecutor, mingling with people one-on-one, talking with them. Knott addressed the crowd shortly afterwards, thanking his supporters and a number of politicians, including former President Donald Trump and Senator Ted Budd. Now, tonight's outcome was expected, with GOP opponent Kelly Daughtry dropping out of the race after Knott picked up an endorsement from Trump. Now, Knott told the crowd that this endorsement was a, quote, gracious boost to the campaign. Asked Brad Knott one-on-one how he plans to sway the state's unaffiliated voters and those outside of this victory party in the upcoming November general election.
How do you convince those voters to vote for you in the general election?
Yeah. It's a great question. Again, we look forward to talking to anybody. In this campaign that we just finished, we talked to a lot of independents, we talked to a lot of unaffiliated, and then obviously Republicans. But our solutions, they're not partisan solutions. You know, what we've advocated for is strengthening law enforcement, securing the border, managing spending in a responsible way, cutting back where we can. Those aren't partisan solutions.
So, of course, this will not be the last time that we see Brad Knott. Things are just now heating up with North Carolina being a battleground state. He's already looking forward to hitting the campaign. He will face off against Democrat Frank Pierce in November. Aaron Thomas, WRAL News, live in Raleigh.
All right, Aaron, thank you. And as we look ahead to November, Laura, we look at the matchup here. The 13th district, though, is a newly drawn district and heavily favors Republicans.
It heavily favors Republicans. In the last election, more than 70% would have voted for Trump had it been drawn at the time. So this is it's safe to say this is a likely Republican pickup.
Why don't we move to the state auditor's race? So this was called a little later in the evening. It was a tight race throughout the night.
We didn't even call it. Actually, Jack Clark called him to concede because we were kind of waiting to see what was happening with this race because it was so tight over the course of the night. Dave Bullock, a well-known name in politics. He's on the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees. Jack Clark, a relative newcomer, a CPA, who is making his first run for statewide office, or any office for that matter. Jack Clark was actually leading at the end of the primary, but there was a wide field, a lot of candidates. And when it was narrowed down to the two of them, it's clear that Mr. Bullock had the advantage.
Let's talk about November.
Should be facing that's incumbent Democratic auditor Jessica Holmes, and so that the two of them, that should be a pretty good race.
Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor, is now leaving that position to run for governor. The Republican nomination up for grabs tonight. Weatherman.
Right, Robinson had endorsed Weatherman, and Weatherman clearly benefited from that. That and the fact that he's been in politics for a long time. He's a well-known GOP operative. Jim O'Neill he's the Forsyth County District Attorney, and you can look at the Forsyth County as the one county that he got there. So the home turf he got, but it was a rough night for Jim O'Neill.
Well, and that it speaks for maybe Howe's chances come November, because the state seemed to like him on the Republican side. What's it look like?
Absolutely. He's going to be facing our current state senator and lieutenant governor nominee for the Democrats, Rachel Hunt, in November.
Okay, so plenty of coverage between now and November, and we will bring it to you as we continue to pay attention to these primaries here tonight, guys.
Yeah, tonight will pale in comparison to what happens in November. Dan and Laura, we'll see you all in a few minutes. For results anytime, just go to WRAL.com.